Long considered mysterious by locals and passerbys alike, the true horrors of Appalachia are now finally in the spotlight, recognized by the one audience that counts: TikTok. Actually, though, as someone who tracks what audiences are interested online, in terms of horror especially, Appalachian horror has, throughout the past 5 years or so, come to finally be recognized. There exist a lot of reasons for that. There have been some specific YouTubers or content creators who have brought it to attention. It was also sort of a trend on short form platforms to explore, as far as you can in a TikTok, Appalachian horror, and also specific creatures, most obviously the Wendigo, but also some other more obscure ones like the Not Deer, have floated to the top of the community consciousness. This video covers an iceberg that I made on Appalachia, the cultural region as a whole. Given that it is an iceberg, I will naturally gravitate towards the terrifying and outlandish facts and fables from this mountain range, but I will also provide a genuine attempt at taking some serious things into account, providing some fun cultural, linguistic, and societal facts. So this should hopefully be both fun and informative. There's a good mix of cryptids, legitimately confusing phenomenon, and also some stuff grounded in reality. So without further ado, we're going to begin this iceberg. If you like icebergs, deep dives into horror on the internet, and all sorts of other fun stuff, make sure to subscribe to my channel and check out some of the other videos I have. For now though, we're going to go right into tier 1 of this video. But before we do that, let me briefly thank today's sponsor, Coupert. Coupert is a free extension designed to make your online shopping more affordable and enjoyable. Available on Chrome, Edge, Opera, Firefox, and Safari, boasting nearly 8 million users, you absolutely cannot go wrong installing this extension. Coupert works with over 200,000 merchants to bring you the best deals they have to offer and constantly verify the validity of the coupons they have while searching for new ones. Right now, I'll show you how to install this valuable tool and demonstrate exactly how it can save you money. If you're on Chrome, you can literally just go to the web store, search Coupert, and have it activated in mere seconds. Now let's see just how much I can save. We're gonna go to Amazon and look for water bottles, cause I just lost mine. I found this Hydro Flask here, but Coupert immediately redirects me to their page where I get an in-depth price comparison to other sites. That's not all though, we're gonna go ahead and look for something else as well. I've been looking around for a new microphone, and there's one here on Newegg. I click on the extension, and right away there's a cashback offer as well as several coupons. There is no reason to delay. This extension can literally only save you money. Even if it's just a couple of dollars at a time, it really adds up. Go ahead, try it yourself. The installation is super easy. Thank you again to Coupert for sponsoring this video, and let's get started. Map of Appalachia. There's definitely a debate over what you could or couldn't call Appalachia, and that's probably because, at least in the United States, it's just as much, if not more, of a cultural phenomenon than it is a geographical one. There are areas which, absent any visible changes of elevation, feel Appalachian, and some which, while geographically Appalachian, maybe don't feel so much so culturally. Estimations vary in size, either by length or thickness. Some maps, for example, won't show Mississippi as being in Appalachia. Others draw thinner or thicker borders, which may include or exclude some of these edge counties. In terms of the mountains themselves, in effect, they stretch all the way from either Alabama or Mississippi, depending on the definition, to either Nova Scotia or Newfoundland. However you define them, pretty much they encompass the whole right side of the USA and Canada. However, culturally, these places differ insanely from one another. When people talk about the cultural bits of Appalachia, they're usually, in my experience, talking about just the American ones, and even within that, sometimes a more condensed, smaller, exclusively mountainous zone within these states. Government definition of Appalachia has differed over the years, but presently, in the USA, 423 counties across 13 states are considered Appalachian by the Appalachian Regional Commission. Pronunciation. I had to put this very high up in the iceberg because I already know that I've got a slew of unhappy comments on the way, but it needs to be said that there is a big controversy about how to pronounce the word Appalachia, or Appalachian for that matter. It boils down to people either saying it like I have, Appalachia, or Appalachian, as in latch. In the present day, Appalachia is generally pronounced this way in the northern part of Appalachia or outside of Appalachia. The southern part of Appalachia uses the latch pronunciation, though I think the use of this pronunciation is spreading. Not only is there a vocal difference in how the A is pronounced, but there's also a debate over whether or not it's sh, as in shush, or ch, as in chop. For example, you could say Appalachia or Appalachia, like Appalachian, or Appalachia versus Appalachia. There's not as big of a debate over that, but I do also hear that argument. Now, to go to the very beginning of the word, the deepest origin we can find, we have the Appalachian tribe, a group of Native Americans who lived in the area and after whom the mountain range is named. The word Appalachian might come from the Hitchiti language, meaning from the other side, or Choctaw, meaning helper. It's also sometimes pronounced with a B, being called Abalachi or something to that effect. In that regard, the original sound was most likely not the latch pronunciation. It appears that at some point, though, through natural linguistic processes, the South began to adopt it. There's a 1758 map, which interestingly spells it Appalachian, but there's also a 1570 map which says Appalachian with a ch. That could be the initial origin of the latch sound, but it's still up for scholarly debate. Also at Appalachian State University, also known as App State, a massive school in North Carolina, they vehemently use the latch pronunciation, and I think people are really starting to push that version of the word. Some authors have suggested that the northern pronunciation grew in popularity after LBJ started talking about Appalachia on TV, and from there, it just sort of spread. It's a complicated issue and one that could be definitely looked into more. I just find it kind of interesting. Randomly while researching, I found this account by a Redditor, which I won't read in full, but basically he says a teacher got in trouble at his school for telling students that the latch pronunciation sounded ignorant, and they were better off saying lay. There is definitely a socioeconomic dimension to it, where people are maybe told or nudged to pronounce it lay. Somebody pointed out that Dolly Parton says lay, but people from where she lives usually say latch.
The mighty Appalachian Mountains, running 1,500 miles from Canada to Georgia, are almost as old as the earth itself.
I think if it's a matter of regional pride, spreading the latch pronunciation is awesome. However, I am from the north, and my family who lives in Appalachia is from the north, so that's just how I naturally say it. However you say it, though, it's definitely not this right here.
The Appalachian Mountains are...
What did you just say?
The Appalachian Mountains? Where are they?
First of all, where I come from, we pronounce it Appalachian.
You're joking, right?
That's how you pronounce it.
It's the Appalachian Mountains.
That sounds fancy.
Wendigoon. You guys knew this was coming. I absolutely could not make this video without bringing up Wendigoon, an incredible YouTuber who I am a massive fan of. Honestly, a lot of you guys, if you're subscribed to me, you probably watch his stuff as well. I mean, we both cover icebergs, gaming stuff, ARGs, analog horror, sometimes even TV and movies. We both have names that are occasionally misconstrued as sexual innuendos. We even both covered the same topic one time. He just got 4 million more views than me. I honestly credit him as the biggest single inspiration behind my content. In terms of the breadth of what I do, it's extremely similar to his. I subbed to him when he started making the Conspiracy Iceberg way back during COVID and started making my own stuff pretty soon after. Wendigoon is an Appalachia native and a proponent of the latch pronunciation, probably driving a lot of northerners to start using it, as he's one of the biggest online influences talking about the region at this moment in time. Earlier I mentioned Appalachia entering the horror space recently, and I think it's reasonable to partially credit him, or at least suggest some degree of correlational relationship between his content and Appalachian horror being popular. His experiences growing up have had micro effects on the stories in his videos, and sometimes entire videos just have personal touches or are based in his childhood. He's hammered out specific creepy things about the region, such as the brown mountain lights, which show up on this iceberg, by the way. More importantly though, on his main and secondary channels, he's highlighted a lot of the critical issues that the region experiences, and he often rallies support for Appalachia. He also personally helped with disaster relief from Hurricane Helene. Throughout his whole time on YouTube, he's managed to consistently show himself as just a really stand-up guy and a really nice dude overall. I remember people a few years ago trying to cancel him because he shot guns or something, and it was like impossible to do because he was always just so nice. He most definitely does not need a shout out from me, but if you haven't taken a look at his videos, you definitely should give them a watch sometime. For a lot of people, he's the introduction, or maybe even only pipeline to issues in Appalachia and some of the lore and culture, and to be honest, I could not think of a better person to do so. Mothman. The only cryptid on Tier 1, and perhaps the most famous from all of Appalachian lore, we have the Mothman. The Mothman is a 100% real creature that dwells in West Virginia, reported around Point Pleasant from 1966 to 1967. Despite the moth name, it was originally described as a man-sized bird, to which some have attributed the sightings to a crane or heron that was maybe out of place. Where did the story actually come from, though? Well, it was first spotted by two Point Pleasant couples who saw what they described as a 7-foot-tall, muscular man with white wings. They couldn't discern his face, however, because his eyes had some sort of hypnotic quality. They sped off, but the creature took after them, flying behind and making a screeching noise. The story somehow made its way into a local newspaper, and sightings of the Mothman began to spread. Some described it as a large bird with red eyes. Others said they looked like bike reflectors. Some people suggest that the name Mothman itself has to do with prevailing superhero influence from the time, especially given Killer Moth and Batman stories. On December 15th of 1967, Silver Bridge, or the Point Pleasant Bridge, collapsed, killing 46 people. This was eventually incorporated into the legend, the idea that perhaps the Mothman was behind this. In 1975, ufologist John Keel wrote The Mothman Prophecies, which eventually inspired a movie by the same name. To this day, the town celebrates the Mothman with a festival annually, and there remains a statue of him in the town of Point Pleasant. There are too many cryptids on this iceberg to dig into the veracity of all of them, so I'm not going to list all the possible explanations or whatnot, but I'm pretty sure even within the cryptid community, this one isn't taken super seriously. We just kind of like him. He's made his way into all sorts of media, including being a boss in the game Trepang 2. Scottish influence. Something that I think is really cool is that the Appalachian Mountains were once connected to the Scottish Highlands in what was once called the Central Pangaean Mountains. But the cooler part is that, even though this was obviously later on, Scottish culture would find its way there. This came in the form of immigration by Scottish and Scots-Irish people to Appalachia around the 18th century. It's suggested that Appalachian folk music was originally derived from these Scottish-Irish immigrants. Also, lots of the mountain folklore that's come to be important in the discussion of Appalachian culture comes from here. For example, there was frequent use of a fable recorded into the early 20th century in Appalachia, which was about telling kids to be good, or the clavers would get them. This actually comes from the Scotsman John Graham of Claverhouse, who was known as Bloody Claverhouse. Knot deer. The knot deer is my favorite relatively Appalachian cryptid, and maybe even my favorite in general. Before I get into this entry, just know that I have a full video on this subject. It's a bit dated, but it goes a lot deeper into the subject that I can here. The knot deer is a cryptid which has been sighted all around the US and Canada, but frequently in Appalachia. They vary in description, but can run upwards of 30 miles an hour, they're the size of an elk, and they exhibit varying degrees of decay or otherwise unsavory appearance. They often have eyes like a predator, either in their actual pupils being shaped differently or their eyes being placed at the front instead of the sides of their head. They're not afraid of humans and are known to be very dangerous. Now, the cool thing about the knot deer, and the point I hammered into on my video in the subject, is that they're kind of real. Basically, there are a ton of plausible explanations for knot deer sightings, and actual real footage of deer acting this way. There are an array of diseases and afflictions, not limited to CWD, that can cause a deer to behave differently or appear deformed. The natural plausibility of the knot deer, on one hand, eliminates them from being an actual cryptid, but on the other hand, it sort of makes it more fun because they're actually the type of thing you might see in real life. I described this story a while ago in a pinned comment on that video, but I myself had a not deer encounter in southern Appalachia. I was camping, but I got to the site too late, and I had like a 2-mile hike to where I was going before I could set up my tent, which started at dusk. Total misplanning on my part. It was a very last minute thing. I was walking up the trail with a ton of switchbacks. It wasn't very technical, but I think they were trying to protect the path, so it was very switchbacky. So with what I'm about to describe, there was a slope to my left. Basically, I was walking forward. I had a red headlamp on, so my vision wasn't messed up or anything, and I heard like movement in the bush to my left. So I kind of just froze, thinking it's at most a raccoon or something. But what happened was a deer ran at full speed across me, left to right, and right back into the woods on its hind legs. Like, seriously, I swear it was on its hind legs. It's both possible for deer to make their way up insane slopes or stand and even walk a bit on their hind legs, but I'd never thought of one running like this. Honestly, it was 10 or 15 feet, very quickly, stood up like a biped. I was terrified. I was frozen for like 2 minutes just contemplating what on earth that was. The sight of a 6-7 foot tall mass bounding at you while you're alone in the woods is probably the worst feeling I can describe. Like, this is what fear was made for. But anyway, the knot deer are a ton of fun. There are a lot of photos and videos of them, and also a lot of sightings, which I'm usually inclined to believe in, given I've sort of seen it myself. Accent. Appalachian English is very interesting. It's a separate thing from a southern USA accent, but there's a lot of overlap. And it's also not just one way of speaking. It's more accurate to say there are multiple Appalachian dialects. For example, the Inland South, as shown on this map, is a very distinct way of speaking, but there's also a Western Pennsylvania dialect that's become to be recognized. There's some unique words and slang that have come out of the region, like Saigoglin, which means crooked. There's a lot of conjugations or connections between multiple words. Like to is often called like to. Plurality often doesn't affect conjugations, like saying two people or things was, for example. A lot of measurements aren't pluralized, like saying it's 6 foot tall. I've heard that one a lot, actually. In my experience, and I've researched this and it is a very big thing, Appalachians nowadays often do a lot of code switching, meaning changing their voice, in this case, to sound generally more American. So just because you don't hear this a lot doesn't mean it doesn't exist. This video shows it nicely. It's from the 2004 documentary Mountain Talk. So it's a bit old, as are many of the people, but it gives a good idea of the sound and some of the slang.
You drive down the street and everybody's wide open, blowing their horns, and don't know nobody and don't want to know nobody and don't care about nobody. It's quite a bit different up here.
Full hike. Hiking the entirety of the Appalachian Trail is an insane experience. Obviously, we've talked about it being a different length, so there's not really one definition of what this looks like, but people tend to stick to the official route, which just goes through the US, and then if they want, adding on some of the Canadian portion. The trail itself was conceived in 1921 by a forester named Benton McKay, who wrote a document called An Appalachian Trail, a project in regional planning. The original idea was connecting a series of farms and camps from Mount Washington in New Hampshire to Mount Mitchell in North Carolina. The first section opened in 1923, and in 1925 the Appalachian Trail Conservatory opened, and they've cared for the project ever since. The trail is very well developed and very safe, with lots of community and visitor centers along the way. Most walkers go northways, but some go top to bottom, and as of 2017, the ATC estimated that there were about 1,200 full completions of it. A full hike usually takes 5 to 7 months, but it can be done in 3. The current record is literally just 40 days, set by Tara Downer, though it was a supported attempt where she didn't need to carry all her gear. The fastest time with traditional backpacking was 45 days. Wendigo. Wendigos are a bit of a fascinating legend, and they also have a very storied development, both in the monster themselves, but also what they represent in literature and horror. The purest form of Wendigo that we know of comes from Algonquin lore, and actually really is an Appalachian in and of itself, or at least it's not associated with southern Appalachia. It's more northern. Essentially, the Wendigo, in its original conception, did not have antlers, nor an exoskull. It resembled a tall, lanky human with stretched skin. as depicted in, say, Until Dawn, for example. In native storytelling, they were often a representation of self-destructive greed in the form of cannibals, where people who became greedy and cannibalized others would turn into Wendigos. In that regard, they were both depicted as, say, their own species, but also something someone could turn into, like a vampire. They've been described with varying degrees of intelligence. One story from the Chippewa of Rama First Nation partially reads, "One time long ago, a big Wendigo stole an Indian boy, but the boy was too thin, so the Wendigo didn't eat him up right away, but he traveled with the Indian boy, waiting for him till he'd get fat. The Wendigo had a knife and he'd cut the boy on the hand to see if he was fat enough to eat, but the boy didn't get fat." There's also another element to the legend, the psychosis. Wendigo psychosis is an actual reported phenomenon described as a culture-bound syndrome occurring mostly in native communities. The psychosis can lead to cannibalism, and treatments for it include either eating animal fats or grease, which were supposed to make the alleged would-be Wendigo vomit ice, or they would just be killed. So stories vary with regard to whether the Wendigo is exclusively a spirit that possesses or causes this psychosis, or if they're actual physical creatures. It's not really clear-cut. Among a few tribes in Canada, there are actual reports of a satirical dance that were once performed in times of scant food to reinforce how bad cannibalism, and thus becoming a Wendigo, is. It's called a Wendigo Kazimawin. That is not an exhaustive or perfectly detailed explanation of the indigenous roots of the Wendigo. I just wanted to point out the general origin. Now, we're faced with two important questions. First, how did the Wendigo come to look like this, and how did it end up in Appalachia instead of up north? Well, to that end, I can't deliver an answer on the Appalachia thing, at least a definitive one. I would be speculating, but essentially the Wendigo is sort of being appropriated and moved to Appalachia, and it's included in conversations in Appalachian horror, but it's also sort of conflated with the not deer occasionally. As far as the actual physical changes to the creature's representation, the first place to look is probably the 1910 book, The Wendigo, which in turn influenced some stories like The Thing That Walked on the Wind and Ithaca. From there, its portrayal in the Stephen King novel Pet Sematary gave it horns, which later became antlers. My theory as to why the Wendigo has become important in terms of talking about Appalachia and Appalachian horror in particular has nothing to do with Appalachia, but rather that the Wendigo just seems to be the most popular homegrown monster in the USA right now. People don't really have legitimate fears of, say, Bigfoot at the moment. I think we think of that as just funny. But what is very popular in horror at the moment are creatures in the woods, creatures which can, say, mimic human voices, something the Wendigo are known to do. Maybe something that tries to beckon you outside of your house at night with human calls and then kills you. Honestly, to expand on that, looking at what's popular in horror right now, I would say the idea of replicants or creatures of some form that look like humans but are not, are usually like elongated or weird, like there's something going on with them. Many of them come from analog horror, but also just amateur horror in general at the moment, bear some similarity to the Wendigo. At least that could be why they've become popular. But yeah, with regard to this entry, though Wendigos have become recently associated with Appalachia, that's not so much of a historical trend as it is a recent one. Memes. Rather than talking about Appalachian memes in general, there's this one that I find really funny in particular, so I'm just going to mention it. Somewhat recently, perhaps as far back as 2 or 3 years ago, but I think just last year, this meme came out which describes a usually Russian, but occasionally PLA soldier getting deployed to Appalachia and then, well, ending up in big trouble. Now, I think it's kind of funny, like, yeah, I'd never want to be part of an Appalachian offensive. There's plenty of reasons for that strategically. Everyone there owns guns, tons of people have lived there for 100 years and know the land well, and it's mountainous and remote. But that's not really why the meme is funny. I feel like this meme in particular is responsible for getting some more Appalachian horror into the community consciousness. Every time I see this meme, people in the comments inevitably end up asking, why? Like, why would you not want to invade Appalachia over another part of the USA? Like O-Block, for example. You end up usually getting two answers. The first one either being monsters with no elaboration, or they're talking about the people there. Sometimes they end up rudely mischaracterizing Appalachians as just, crazy people that'll mess you up if threatened. But sometimes they actually talk about like the bobcats and stuff and legitimate reasons why you wouldn't want to be there at night. I don't know, I personally think West Virginians are the ones making these memes to taunt Russians. Personally, what I think this meme may or may not actually reference, but what I do believe to be the ultimate reason why Appalachia is such a spooky setting is because you can always go deeper. There's always a Styx beyond the Styx. There's always another back road or logging road or a thing that's not on the map. It may be that with Google Earth now, this is more of a perception than a reality, but say 50 years ago, Appalachian communities were occasionally effectively inaccessible. And for that reason, they bred a certain mystique. That persists to this day. Part of the fun of Appalachian spookiness, in my opinion, is that we don't really know why it's spooky. A massive region of the United States, filled with unique fauna and people, chock full of communities that keep to themselves, is a blank canvas for horror, which is just now starting to be explored. Bobcat screams. You might get through this video or any similar video about Appalachian horror and lore and be like, okay, well, what's the actual danger? Like, name one actual creepy thing that actually happens that people are familiar with that you might see in Appalachia and not like Wendigos. To that end, we have bobcats and other large felines. Now, here's the thing. Bobcats are definitely all over Appalachia. My family catches them on our trail cams all the time. Mountain lions, on the other hand, are much more prevalent in the western US, but there are claims and sightings of them or their tracks in Appalachia. There actually was once what was called the eastern cougar in Appalachia, but they were hunted to extinction. Anyway, let's just limit it to bobcats only for now. You could apply what I'm saying to both though. Their screams are terrifying. Sometimes they're just shrill and inhuman, sounding like an Aztec death whistle. But on the other hand, they could sound very feminine or even infantile. And to be honest, I don't know which one of those would be worse to hear alone in the woods at night. I've heard Appalachians online describe hearing some which sounded like little girls. Some people even saying they heard them all the time growing up. Anyway, I would not want to run into one of those guys, let alone just hear them while outside at night. Blue Fugates. The Blue Fugates were a family from the hills of eastern Kentucky, known for having a rare genetic condition that turned their skin a bluish color. This all started in or around 1820 with the marriage of Martin Fugate and Elizabeth Smith in an area called Troublesome Creek. Both of them were unknowingly carrying a rare recessive gene called MET-H, which led to a condition that reduces the blood's ability to carry oxygen. This results in a bluish tint to the skin, lips, and nails. It literally turns you blue. There was a limited gene pool in the area, and as such, the condition persisted locally, with blue people being born until 1875, where the last known person, Benjamin Stacy, showed symptoms. Over several generations, multiple members of the family were born with visibly blue skin. They lived fairly normal lives and even had long lifespans, with the bluest of them all, Luna Stacy, living to be 84 and having 13 children. A doctor who had researched similar things in native Alaskans heard about the Fugate family, coming to work with them and discovering that an enzyme called diapherase removed oxygen from red blood cells, which made the blood appear brown, which in turn made the skin appear blue. And he was able to cure it relatively easily using methylene blue. It is a fascinating case of a community which must have been insanely mysterious back in the day. I mean, if I heard about something like that in 1900, that would have been really, really weird. I mean, it's weird now, but we have modern medicine on our side to explain it away at least. I would have thought those guys were aliens back then. Some people say, though, that these folks still exist in Kentucky if you look hard enough. To begin, we have the Tailpo. The Tailpo, also known as tailbones or tally tale, is a cryptid and a fable of sorts. It's described as being about the size of a dog. It has dark fur, glowing red or yellow eyes, pointed ears, and a long tail. Notably, it possesses the ability to speak, often demanding the return of its severed tail. But it also likes to repeat itself. Basically, it goes that a hermit living in a remote cabin with his 3 dogs encounters the tailypo during a time of scarcity. After shooting the creature's tail, causing it to fall off, he eats it. But then the hermit is haunted by the tailypo, which repeatedly comes to reclaim its tail. Each time it comes by, the hermit sends his dogs after it, but one doesn't come back each time, until none are left. Eventually, the tailypo confronts the hermit directly, leading to his demise. Depending on how violent the story is told, it's either left ambiguous, that all that's left of the guy's cabin is the chimney, or that he just got flayed to death. People have considered the story to be a representation of Appalachian anxieties over food scarcity, or a way to teach kids not to abuse animals. It's more of a fable than a cryptid in that regard. It appears to have inspired this thing from the 2019 movie After Midnight. Alien big cats. Here's a fun entry teetering the line of the real and the extraordinary. This is very much in line with the bobcat and mountain lion thing I talked about earlier. Basically, an alternative explanation for those unexplained mountain lion sightings is that there are different, more mysterious creatures in the Appalachian Mountains. Alien big cats, or ABCs, also known as phantom cats, are large felines spotted outside of where they should be. What I mean by that is that they're not necessarily one creature, one entity, rather they're a classification. They are literally just known species of big cats, so say mountain lions or jaguars, spotted where they shouldn't be. So this phenomenon exists all over the world. However, in Appalachia, there are a few ideas about it in particular. One specific one that's been seen in Appalachia, allegedly, are black panthers in North Carolina. For years, black panthers have been spotted around Oriental North Carolina, but it's never been officially documented. Black panthers are not supposed to live in North Carolina, nor really any of North America at all. There also have been sightings of mountain lions in Appalachia or the eastern cougar, which is considered extinct, but of course, not everyone believes that. An explanation that's been put forward for alien big cats in general, but Europe in particular, is that they're escaped exotic pets. For example, in Great Britain, this is the list of cats that should not be found around Great Britain that have been caught by humans after being caught as pets, which eventually escaped. If that interests you, you have to stick around for a particular entry later on in this iceberg, where we talk about some escaped animals. Ohio Grassman. Moving on to the Ohio Grassman. The Ohio Grassman is believed by scientists to be an extremely aggressive Sasquatch variant. The first major sighting of the Ohio Grassman happened in August 1978 in Minerva, Ohio. Evelyn and Hal Clayton's grandchildren, as well as their friends, were playing around their house when they suddenly ran inside terrified, claiming to have seen a huge hairy creature near a gravel pit. When the Claytons went to check it, they saw a dark, matted, 300-pound ape-like figure rummaging through trash. This kicked off a series of strange encounters. The Claytons went on to repeatedly see the creature, including one night where it looked straight through their kitchen window. The police never found the creature. They noted large footprints and a horrible smell at the scene of the crime. The Claytons even claimed to see 2 creatures on a hill near the local strip mine during daylight. Chillingly, around the time of the first sighting, the family's German Shepherd was found sadly killed with its neck broken, suspected to be the creature's doing. Sadly, I believe this was the only attributed sighting specifically to the Grassman, but there have been other alleged Sasquatch sightings in Ohio. Sasquatch as a whole are sighted every once in a while in Appalachia, but obviously, talking about Bigfoot, I don't think people actually see it that often. I just really like the name Ohio Grassman. It sounds like a crackhead or something, I don't know.
Pretty exciting coming up on the place where this grass man's feeding virtually every 2 or 3 days. All we have to do is set out Willie's pattern, and we'll have him trapped.
Get up, get up, get up, get up! Where in the hell's your pants, Bill? Damn, he's right up that trail, guys.
The grass man's right here. We can't have him in our camp. We got to get his ass out of here. Speaking
of Sasquatches, we now move on to the sheep squatch. The sheep squatch, also known as the white thing, is a woolly-haired creature known to inhabit southern counties in West Virginia. Specifically, sightings of it peaked in Boone County around the 1990s. The sheep squatch is noted to be larger than a bear and entirely white. It has a dog-like head, but sharp teeth and horns like a goat. Allegedly, it smells like sulfur, due to its possible origin in the TNT area of Mason County, just like the Mothman. There actually have been a few sightings of this thing, but they're pretty inconsistent, with some people saying he's more of a dog, some people saying he's more of a Sasquatch. There are such things as spirit bears, which are a subspecies of the black bear that appear white, but they're found much further north, so it's probably not that. Moon-eyed people. The Moon-eyed people are a group of creatures from Cherokee mythology who traditionally lived in Appalachia. Though it's unknown precisely how long the Cherokee have had these stories, they related them to Europeans pretty early on. An account from 1797, written by Benjamin Smith Barton, explains that they are called moon-eyed because they see poorly during the day. The Moon people are occasionally described as the first settlers of Appalachia, and some accounts suggest that the Cherokee credit them with the earliest settlement of the area, responsible for creating mounds and structures. This included a rudimentary fortification at the Fort Mountain State Park. They are described as having white skin, beards, and being short. Now, the Moon people are probably a legendary creature, but there is a lot of debate about whether or not they really existed. Most of our accounts about them come from sources written by Europeans learning from the Cherokee in and around Georgia. As Europeans tended to do, they wrote down stories that had long been part of an oral tradition. But presumably, there are tons of miscommunications or, for whatever reason, inconsistencies that have persisted to this day. Some people suggest that they actually refer to another tribe of Native Americans who lived in the area before the Cherokee. Others suggest they refer to a native white people who were there before the Cherokee. Some think they refer to mythical creatures, and some people think they refer to still mythical creatures who were just real. Regardless of their true nature, Cherokee legend states that the Cherokee killed or otherwise drove them out of Appalachia. One explanation, which I'm not sure I believe but I do like, comes from Barbara Alice Mann, who belongs to the Ohio Bear Clan Seneca, which suggests that the Moon-eyed people were an ancient Adena people who moved from Ohio southward around 200 BC. There's actually an effigy of the Moon-eyed people at the Cherokee County Historical Museum, which was allegedly dug up in 1841 by Felix Ashley. However, it's debated if this even represents them or who exactly made it. Some people suggest it's just a man and a woman or a representation of two rivers. Braxton County Monster. The Braxton County Monster, which you may better know as the Flatwoods Monster, is another fascinating piece of West Virginia lore. The legend of the Flatwoods Monster spawned after a bright flash of light crossed the sky in Braxton County, West Virginia, on September 12, 1952. Disbelieving scientists attribute the phenomenon to both a meteor causing the light flash and the sighting of a barn owl alongside some visual tricks, accounting for the appearance of the creature. The main sighting occurred on the evening of September 12, 1952, in Flatwoods, West Virginia, where two boys and their friend witnessed a bright object streak across the sky and land on a nearby farm. They alerted Kathleen May, the nearest neighbor I presume, who, along with others, including a National Guardsman, went to investigate. At the site, they reported seeing a tall, man-like figure with a red glowing face, claw-like hands, and a hooded appearance with a head that looked like an ace of spades. It emitted a hissing sound and moved towards them, causing them to panic. They all reported a strange mist and feelings of nausea. Though local authorities found no evidence that night, a journalist later claimed to discover skid marks and a gummy-like substance at the site. This was later suggested to be evidence of a UFO landing. The event sparked national media attention, and UFO researchers quickly descended on the town, turning the sighting into one of the most well-known American UFO encounters, now often referred to, like I mentioned, as the Flatwoods Monster. Now, there does exist a lot of evidence, at least for part of the conventional explanation. On that same night, an actual meteor was seen streaking across Maryland and Pennsylvania, and an investigator claimed that there were red aircraft beacons visible from the location of the sighting, which would account for the red eyes. The same investigator suggested that, based on the shape and noise, it was a barn owl, and its position on the tree made it appear like it was large and wearing a sort of skirt. The description of wiry, claw-like hands could have been branches. Like many of the other creatures we've talked about today, the Flatwood Monster is well celebrated in the town. Brown Mountain Lights. This is a super cool entry. It's actually real, somewhat mysterious, and somewhat contested to this day. Wendigoon has a full video on them if you're interested in a deeper explanation. He's also a lot better about telling the legends about the lights. I'm just going to sort of describe them factually. The Brown Mountain Lights hail from Brown Mountain, North Carolina. The mystery of the Brown Mountain Lights was first recorded in 1912. There were mentions of ghosts and such before then, but none were specifically associated with mountain lights, so it's suggested that this is a relatively new phenomenon. Just a year before this story started to spread, a copy of Jules Verne's book, Master of the World, was published in English. To quickly recap the book, it was written near the end of Verne's life, and it's pretty bleak, discussing fears of totalitarianism and the rise of tyrants. But it takes place in the North Carolina mountains and involves a mad scientist building a blimp in his secret lair, which makes giant lights shine around Table Rock. This is thought to have helped spread the legend a lot, or contributed to the development of it in the first place. Though perhaps spurred on by this book, the area around Brown Mountain was rapidly electrifying, and eventually, as townspeople began to grow increasingly confused and superstitious over the lights, a United States Geological Surveyor was sent to prove that all the lights were either trains or occasionally fires and car lights. He did so, and App State actually set up cameras later on which recorded thousands of hours of footage which apparently never identified any ghost lights at all. But what came out of this? Well, mostly local ghost stories. There was a lot of cultural impact from this story as a whole, but from what I've heard, the stories of the Brown Mountain ghost lights were mostly out of concern of the community. They weren't such a national phenomenon like any of the UFO sightings or anything like that. To this day, the idea persists in some degree, and it's also fun to think about because, totally unrelated lights can appear due to random meteorological or atmospheric conditions, so that could keep the legend going. You never know. It's hard to entirely disbelieve in that regard. Allegui. This entry is a lot like the Moon-Eyed people we talked about earlier. However, instead of being little people, they are big people. The Allegui were a race of giants, or at least are a myth about giants, created by the Lenape or the Delaware tribe. The Lenape-Allegui War, as recounted in Lenape oral tradition, describes a legendary conflict between the migrating Lenape people and the Allegui or Talegui, a race of towering, fortified giants inhabiting the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. Initially seeking passage through Allegui territory, the Lenape were attacked, prompting a prolonged war. Allied with the Mengwe, who were believed to be ancestors of the Iroquois, the Lenape eventually defeated the Allegui, who then fled southward. However, the remains of the Allegui are supposed to stalk the Allegheny Mountain Range in West Virginia. Today, as a cryptid, they either exist as the last surviving member of this giant race, or sometimes a small tribe. Depending on what story you hear, they might be human, but insanely massive for a human, or just giants who are completely unrelated to humans as a species. The Beaver Run Snow Gator. At the Beaver Run Reservoir in Pennsylvania, people speak of what's come to be called a snow gator. The Beaver Run Snow Gator is an actual gator that was spotted all the way up in northern Appalachia. There's an actual picture of him. This creature, also known as the Beast of Beaver Run, has not been spotted since his first appearance in 2011, and wildlife authorities suggested he wouldn't survive the winter. How he even got there is an absolute mystery. However, we all know that such a mysterious gator is more likely to be part of a secret Appalachian cryptid gator race that remains in Pennsylvania to this day. The Beast of Beckley. The Beast of Beckley is a creature which, actually like many things I've explained on this iceberg, has appeared in Fallout 76. First spotted in 2001, it's had a few sightings, including one as recent as 2019. It was first spotted in the early 2000s by a young boy who described a tall, shadowy creature with sharp teeth and glowing yellow eyes. Notably, it's also described as having 4 eyes, as well as a pitch black, almost humanoid form. The creature often appears in the shadows, never fully visible. One person described an encounter with it in 2011 when it appeared near their home, towering over their father's truck, then quickly vanishing into the woods. leaving behind only gashes and trees and an overwhelming feeling of dread. This one is probably the least famous of any I've described today, and to my knowledge, doesn't have a festival named after it, or anything. Very sad. Snallygaster. The snallygaster is a reptilian bird-like thing, which has become a bit of an Appalachian legend due to superstitions from German immigrants and a sprinkle of sensational reporting. This all started in Frederick County, Maryland, where Germans were settling in the 1730s. They started reporting of a Schnellergeist, or quick ghost. Reporters suggest that the community was terrified by this thing, which was initially described as looking like half bird, half demon. It had both a beak and tentacles, and was known to scoop up victims and fly away. Supposedly, 7 pointed stars keep it away, and to this day, these are painted on the sides of barns. In the 20th century, newspaper articles were printed describing people encountering the snallygaster, which sounded like a train whistle and had enormous wings, claw-like hooks, and an eye in the center of its forehead. The Smithsonian put out an award for killing it, and allegedly, President Roosevelt considered hunting it. It's become rendered in a lot of media, like once again Fallout 76, and also a Blair Witch game. Greenbrier Bunker. Stepping away from goofy cryptids, here's a really interesting historical entry. In southern West Virginia, in the Allegheny Mountains, there is a luxury resort called the Greenbrier. It's fancy and beautiful, and 28 presidents have stayed there. It houses a fascinating secret, which is that there's a massive Cold War bunker built under it. Let's get into that. Project Greek Island was a continuity of government program which started in the 1950s. Built in response to the Cuban Revolution and later missile crisis, a classified bunker was made under the hotel while an above-ground addition was being built to cover the presence of workers. It was quite ingenious, actually. The ground they dug up for the bunker was hidden by putting it at the local airfield, expanding the landing strip to double over and help let larger aircraft land if they needed to carry congressmen. And then they built an expansion on the golf course to cover up the top of the bunker. It was designed for the legislative branch to use in case of an attack on DC, and included broadcast studios which would simulate actually being in DC by having seasonal backdrops. For years, government workers posed as people installing televisions, working for a fake company headed by a member of the Army Signal Corps. Later on, some of these employees would end up giving guided tours of the bunker. Eventually, it was exposed in 1992 by the Washington Post. Ted Gupp, prompted by long-lasting local rumors about the construction, ended up finding documents and secured interviews about the whole thing, and the government eventually admitted it and decommissioned the bunker. Now you can go tour it, but it's also a data center. I think it's cool in particular because usually in Appalachian lore, there aren't many Men in Black themes that's usually reserved for Western or Southwestern US lore. But here we have an instance of a secret government program happening under the nose of the West Virginian public for half a decade. I'd like to have been able to walk around through that community in, say, 1960 and ask the people about the creepy things they saw or things that confused them. You know, just the idea that a whole town spends years seeing 5'10", 6-foot guys with regulation haircuts and athletic builds, or guys in suits working on golf course management is interesting. It's also definitely still happening in other places today. This case in particular adds a whole new dimension to Appalachian lore and the potentials for Appalachian horror, being the government-generated side of things, and I think that's really cool. Appalachian Chupacabra. The Appalachian Chupacabra is a creature which has been sighted a few times in West Virginia. It's said to have immigrated from Puerto Rico. Frequently, torn-up carcasses found in the woods are attributed to this thing. The TV show Mountain Monsters investigated the phenomenon quite dramatically. Allegedly, a Sasquatch in Appalachia uses these chupacabras as a sort of hunting dog, so reports of them often mention them being in packs.
Son of a bitch! Hey, there's two of them!
Pennsylvania White Bigfoot. Much like the sheep squatch, the Pennsylvania White Bigfoot is a large white Sasquatch. There is actual video footage of this thing, supposedly. Some people argue this is an elderly Sasquatch which has white fur due to its, well, old age. Cumberland Dragon. The final goofy cryptid of this iceberg is the Cumberland Dragon. Also known as Goosefoot, this creature was sighted in the Cumberland Mountains only once in 1794. The creature was described as having 2 legs and scales, and stood upright. It was brown, yellow, and black, with red eyes, and was about 4 or 5 feet tall. The man who saw it stood face to face with it for 3 minutes, but was under orders not to fire at anyone except Indians, so he never did. What he did do was attempt to strike it with his sword, to which it jumped up 8 feet and shot a blood-like substance out of its mouth. After it disappeared, an examination of its tracks showed them to be goose-like, hence the name. Guys, I gotta say, I love Appalachian lore. I want to believe there's something out there. I don't know about this one in particular, though. Men in Black. So I talked about how, in terms of the themes surrounding Appalachian horror and lore, Men in Black don't really come in as much as, say, they do in maybe stories from Nevada or New Mexico or whatnot, and I agree that that's the case, but it doesn't mean they've never showed up. With Men in Black, I suppose they're sometimes considered aliens or cryptids in and of themselves, but I more see them as the government cover-uppy side of things, where they are men who represent people who have an interest in keeping UFO or cryptid sightings under wraps. Some Men in Black have been connected to the story of the Mothman mentioned earlier. We know that plenty of investigators went to Point Pleasant to look into the situation, as did many reporters, but there are credible reports of mysterious, suit-wearing men in black around the area. Mary Heyer, a reporter who often covered strange things about the town, and in particular the Mothman sightings, was allegedly visited by these men in black. Besides that, there aren't many agreed-upon sightings of men in black with, multiple sources, besides, say, the Greenbrier thing, if you count that. Oftentimes when I read spooky Appalachia stories from Reddit or whatever, people will, end the stories with a Men in Black encounter. So, they say they saw a cryptid and then the next day someone knocks on their door, but, that just sounds so fake. Like I mentioned, I think maybe with stories or short films or whatever that happens in the future that take place in Appalachia, they have the opportunity to go this route, but it's not nearly as common. Like I mentioned, maybe with short stories or films about Appalachia, the creators have the opportunity to go that route, but not necessarily the obligation. They're not nearly as popular. The Zanesville Incident. I have applied a heartily liberal definition of Appalachia throughout this video. A lot of the places I've indicated as Appalachia, some people might disagree with. This spot is pushing it a bit, but Zanesville is included on the map of Appalachian, Ohio, at least by authorities like the Appalachian Regional Commission. I also just kind of wanted to tell this story because it's a little funny. Well, it's very tragic. It's not funny, but you'll see what I mean. Also, for this entry, I'll be showing some sad pictures of animals here and there, so if you're not into that, go ahead and skip to here for the next entry. In 2011, a veteran who was keeping a very large stock of exotic animals in Zanesville, Ohio, tragically decided to release all of them and then take his own life, after his wife left him and debts were mounting up. Now, before this, having exotic animals wasn't really regulated in Ohio, so I believe technically everything up until letting them out was legal. Basically, he let 50 of his 56 animals escape. Law enforcement tragically hunted and killed 48 of them, and the remainder that he left behind in his house were taken to the Columbus Zoo. The 2 missing animals were presumed eaten, but the possibility remains that they escaped, or that they didn't have an accurate count of the animals to begin with. Perhaps some of them made it somewhere and were never caught. Of the 48 animals that were killed, the list included lions, tigers, bears, wolves, a monkey, and a baboon. So how did this crazy night even start? Well, people have been complaining about this guy's farm constantly. They knew this guy kept endangered animals, but I don't think everyone knew the full extent of it. After the man took his life and let them go, his neighbor went outside to take his horse out for, horse time. And he noticed the guy's horses, because he had horses too, were running in a circle, about 60 of them. That was strange enough for him to take a closer look, and he saw a black bear in the center of all these horses. While crazy, this is possible to see in Southeast Ohio, so he just assumed it was an insane find and ignored it. However, not too long after this, he saw an African lion right in front of him, separated by only a fence, which could easily be jumped over. He took his horse back to the barn, locked the doors, and ran to tell his mother who lived with him to make sure she was okay. The mother then called the farm, like the house of the guy who let them go, and after they didn't answer, she decided to call 911. Police from that night describe all sorts of crazy stuff. After the first 911 call, police assumed maybe there were a few animals loose, not 50. A deputy saw a gray wolf running down the road and he was ordered not to let it escape. He drove behind it until it went towards an open field where he could safely shoot at it. Then he did so before it escaped to the tree line. After doing this, he headed towards the barn where, after getting out of his car, he saw a black bear which immediately charged him. He managed to kill it with his service pistol. In a few minutes, he, being the only officer to actually have a rifle, shot a male and female African lion as well as a mountain lion. At some point, a vet was there and they tried to tranquilize a tiger, but it just got really mad and started sprinting away, so they had to shoot it tragically. Another tiger was hit by a car on the highway. The monkey who went missing was considered highly likely to be infected with the herpes B virus. The monkey was most likely eaten by one of the big cats, but the public was advised not to approach it if they found him. Signs were put up warning the public about what was going on. Apparently, several people were arrested for trying to steal the carcasses of lions when this all was happening. This is a major tragedy. 18 endangered Bengal tigers were killed, but fortunately, nobody was hurt, the remainder of the animals were rescued, and the law was changed to try and prevent this from happening again. I like to think that maybe the monkey did escape and lived on to inspire future Appalachian Sasquatch stories. It is very likely that the officers accounted for everything, so there's a very little chance of a secret Bengal tiger population existing in southeast Ohio. Part of why I put this on here, something that came to my mind, was that the night this was happening, my grandpa was driving home from Columbus, so he passed through Zanesville on his way to his house that night, and he called my mom and said, "You are not going to believe this, but I just saw a lion sprint across the road." She did not believe him, and we were like, that's it, he's crazy. But later on, we looked at the news and saw that it was indeed very plausible he had seen a lion. Anyways, now it's a lot harder to get exotic animals in Ohio, but I do know people still do it. Like I mentioned earlier, exotic animal escapes are the biggest driver behind the alien big cat phenomenon, so who knows, maybe some random farms let mountain lions escape every once in a while, and they are the reason people have strange sightings. I guarantee that similar things have happened on smaller scales somewhere in Appalachia, probably with mountain lions, and they just never get reported, but occasionally generate these sightings. But who knows? Abandoned Appalachia. For the final entry on this iceberg, we have Abandoned Appalachia. Abandoned Appalachia refers to the swaths of structures and even entire communities that lay dormant or left behind all over the region. For some, they're an urbex paradise, but for others, they're a sad remainder of a time and culture which, in some places, have simply packed up and left. The exploring that can be done to this day in Appalachia is a bit interesting. It tends to differ from, well, more urban exploration. I've found structures in the absolute middle of nowhere which are a ton of fun to go through. And I often watch a lot of these videos where guys either explore it or give an overview of a specific town which rose, had its heyday, and then fell into obscurity and disrepair. I think it's kind of fun and relaxing to watch this type of content and even visit these places occasionally myself, but it is important to keep in mind exactly why this type of thing happens. These towns are often a reflection of the grand, big picture problems Appalachia faces, much of which are due to industries drying up and leaving and people just not having jobs, but they also can represent present day struggles with the economy, addiction, and more. I think responsible exploration of this type of thing is cool and honestly very informative. It's something I might do on my other channel sometime, but it is important to consider why things are the way they are. Alright guys, thank you for joining me on this fantastic iceberg journey today. As always, I really appreciate getting the opportunity to entertain you all, and if you enjoyed this video today, subscribe so you can stick around for more iceberg charts and occasional deep dives into specific stuff, as well as coverage of analog horror and ARGs. Also, like I mentioned briefly at the end, I have a second channel where you can see me do random travel and exploring stuff, and I implore you to check it out. If you've ever enjoyed my content, or if this is your first time here at Seed Butter and you really enjoyed this video, the best way that you can help me out right now is by subscribing to that channel so I can get some traction over there. Thanks again for everything, and as always, if you want to help make future icebergs, make sure to join the Discord, the link to which is in the video's description. You'll be able to get a hold of me there and contribute to future video ideas. Also, if you'd like to count yourself amongst my greatest supporters, consider joining my Patreon so you can see every upload a little bit early. If you have any creepy stories from living in Appalachia or any comments or anything you want to share, please do so below. But for now, that's all I've got, so I wish you guys a great night and I hope to see you again.